The psychology of people who never feel safe. Being themselves. There are people who move through the world as if wrapped in invisible armor, not because they want protection, but because somewhere along the way, they learned they needed it. They monitor every tone, every expression, every shift in the room, scanning for danger that others can't see. Their smiles are measured, their words are filtered. Their true selves appear only in small fleeting moments like birds that land for a heartbeat before vanishing again. People assume they are calm, composed, socially graceful, but inside there is a constant negotiation. Is it safe to be me right now? For some, the answer rarely feels like yes. This is the quiet psychology of those who have spent a lifetime hiding in plain sight. There are people who walk into a room and instantly study it the way others read a map. They notice the tension in someone's shoulders, the unfinished sentence in someone's eyes, the shift in energy that most people never register. Before they take a single step, they already know who is irritated, who is distracted, and who is safe to approach. It's not a skill they practiced. It's a reflex they had to learn. For them, the world is never simply a place. It is a landscape filled with signals, some visible, many imagined, all emotionally relevant. Their nervous system is always slightly elevated, like a radio tuned to the faintest frequencies of threat. Even in calm environments, their body behaves as if something could go wrong at any moment. Not loudly, not dramatically, just constantly. They do not walk, they tread, they do not speak, they measure, they do not reveal, they adapt. This is the psychology of invisible vigilance. To others, they often appear composed. They listen more than they speak. They smile politely. They rarely interrupt, rarely confront, rarely demand space. But behind that quiet exterior is a complex internal choreography. Thoughts rearranging themselves before they are spoken, emotions folding themselves into smaller shapes, instincts being paused and examined before allowed into the world. Every conversation is a balancing act. Every social interaction is a negotiation. Every expression passes through an internal checkpoint. Will this make them uncomfortable? Will this change how they see me? Is it safe to say this? Will this cause conflict? Will I regret showing too much? People often mistake this for shyness, or emotional maturity, or even kindness. But it isn't any of those things. It is fear wrapped in gentleness. It is self-protection disguised as calm. These individuals don't hide because they want to. They hide because they learned, slowly, painfully, that visibility comes with consequences. Growing up, they may have discovered that certain emotions triggered anger, or certain truths were dismissed, or certain curiosities were mocked. They learned that being fully themselves made the room colder, quieter, or more dangerous. And over time, without anyone noticing, they became experts at shrinking, not physically, but emotionally. So now, as adults, they enter life with subtle caution. They are always half present, half guarded. They show enough to appear normal, but not enough to feel exposed. In friendships, they are the ones who listen deeply, but rarely share. In relationships, they love intensely, but speak gently, afraid that saying the wrong thing could shift the dynamic. At work, they are reliable, agreeable, and careful not to cause friction. People praise their calmness, their sensitivity, their diplomacy. They don't realize these traits grew from a nervous system convinced it must always be ready. Even in moments of genuine joy, there is hesitation. They may laugh freely for a moment, but a part of them is already monitoring how loud the laughter was, whether it drew attention, whether it might be interpreted as too much. Their body pulls them back to safety, even from happiness. They are not choosing caution. Their brain is choosing it for them. And underneath all this vigilance is something fragile and often unspoken: the longing to rest, to let the guard down, to live without scanning every room, every face, every silence. but wanting rest and feeling safe enough to rest are two very different things. For someone who has never truly felt safe being themselves, the world becomes a place they navigate, not a place they inhabit. Every step is careful. Every moment is adjusted. Every truth is softened. Not because they are weak, but because, once upon a time, being themselves was a risk they could not afford, and the body remembers risks long after the mind tries to forget them. No one is born afraid of being themselves. A child arrives in the world unfiltered, crying loudly, reaching freely, expressing every emotion without hesitation. Authenticity is not a choice, it is their default language. But somewhere along the line, some children learn that their natural self is not always welcome. Sometimes this happens abruptly, a single violent moment, a scream that cuts through the air, a slap that comes without explanation, a punishment so unpredictable it teaches the child that safety is conditional. Other times, it happens quietly. A parent who dismisses their feelings with a cold, "Stop overreacting." A caregiver who only shows affection when the child is obedient, quiet, or pleasing. A home where smiles are earned but never given freely. A space where emotions are something to be managed, not understood. For many, the fear forms gradually, like water shaping stone. Each small moment leaves a mark. A harsh criticism becomes a warning. A disappointed sigh becomes a reprimand. A withdrawn parent becomes a message. Your needs are too much. A chaotic home becomes a silent lesson. Stay small, stay soft, stay quiet. Children study the adults around them the way sailors study the sea, watching for storms, learning patterns, memorizing moods. And if the waves of their household rise unpredictably, the child's nervous system becomes an expert navigator. They learn that being fully themselves can trigger reactions they don't understand, can't control, and deeply fear. So they adapt. They learn to smile when they want to cry. They learn to apologize before they've done anything wrong. They learn to stay invisible to avoid becoming a target. They learn to change themselves to keep the peace, not because they are manipulative, but because they are trying to survive. Some grew up loved, but not understood. Parents who provided food, shelter, education, but not emotional safety. Parents who were too overwhelmed by their own life, trauma, or mental health to notice the child's emotional world. Neglect does not always look like abandonment. Sometimes it looks like a parent who is physically present but emotionally unreachable. Others grew up in homes that looked normal from the outside. Clean floors, polite dinners, framed photographs. But inside those walls, warmth had to be earned. Love was inconsistent. Approval came and went unpredictably. The child learned that their worthiness depended on performance, behavior, or silence. And then there are the children who grew up walking on eggshells. Homes where anger erupted without warning, where peace felt temporary, where the child learned to hold their breath through most of their childhood. In such environments, authenticity feels dangerous. Being yourself becomes a risk rather than a right, and the child, wanting only to survive, to belong, to stay close to the people they depend on, begins to hide parts of themselves, not consciously, not intentionally, but quietly, instinctively. The loud parts are softened. The emotional parts are tucked away. The curious parts are dimmed. The vulnerable parts are locked deep inside. This is not a decision. It is an adaptation. By the time these children grow into adults, they no longer remember the exact moment they started hiding. They only know the result, a life where self-expression feels unsafe, relationships where truth feels heavy, a body that reacts to visibility like a threat. And the saddest part is this: many of them blame themselves for it. They think they are too sensitive, too anxious, too complicated, never realizing that their fear is not a flaw. It is a memory written into their nervous system, a memory of a home where being themselves came with consequences, a memory of learning long before they had language for it, that the safest version of them was the smallest one. Long before a person can explain their fear of being seen, their body has already memorized the rules. Not the logical mind, not the adult reasoning, but the deeper, older parts of the brain, the ones designed for survival. These regions don't care about identity or self-expression. They care about safety. And if safety was uncertain during childhood, the brain adapts in ways that remain long after the danger is gone. At the center of this is the amygdala, the threat detection system. In most people, it activates only when something truly frightening happens. But in someone who grew up watching for emotional storms, the amygdala fires at much smaller signals. A raised voice, a disappointed expression, a delayed reply, even a subtle change in someone's tone. Their brain responds as if bracing for impact, even when the present moment holds no real threat. This isn't paranoia. This isn't overthinking. This is a nervous system trained by experience. When the amygdala is repeatedly triggered in childhood, the brain wires itself around constant alertness. The child's body becomes familiar with vigilance, heart beating slightly faster, muscles slightly tense, breath slightly shallow. Over years, these states begin to feel normal. The brain becomes a home that expects danger, even when life appears peaceful. Alongside this, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for emotional regulation, develops differently when a child grows up in unpredictable environments. It becomes overly involved in self-monitoring. Don't say that. Don't react too strongly. Don't upset them. Stay controlled. Stay acceptable. The child internalizes the belief that their authenticity needs to be managed, filtered, softened. By adulthood, this becomes automatic. They don't consciously decide to hide parts of themselves. Their brain does it for them before the thought even forms. Then there is the fawn response, a lesser-known survival mechanism. Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fawning is when a person tries to appease others to avoid conflict, rejection, or danger. They adapt their personality to whoever is in front of them. They anticipate needs before they're spoken. They give more than they receive. They attend to others' emotions while ignoring their own. This is not kindness. It is self-protection disguised as generosity. People who live this way often don't realize they're doing it. To them, it feels like being considerate, being easygoing, being someone who doesn't cause trouble. But biologically, it is their nervous system avoiding the threat of disapproval. There's also the matter of attachment. Children who grow up with inconsistent love, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, develop anxious or avoidant attachment patterns. Their brains learn that connection is unreliable, unpredictable, or conditional. As adults, they fear being too much, or too little, or too honest, or too visible. Their entire personality begins orbiting around one unspoken question: what version of me keeps me safe? Identity itself becomes adaptive rather than authentic. Masking, another psychological behavior, emerges from this. It is the act of presenting a curated version of oneself to the world, not out of manipulation, but out of survival. People mask their sadness, their excitement, their curiosity, their discomfort. They mask their preferences, their needs, even their humor. Over time, the mask feels more real than the person beneath it. And here is the most painful truth. The brain does not unlearn these patterns simply because circumstances change. An adult who now lives in a calm home may still carry the reactions formed in a chaotic childhood. A person surrounded by love may still feel unsafe being known. A kind partner may still trigger old fears, not by their actions, but by the nervous system's memory. So when people hide, it is not because they are weak. It is because their brain learned to protect them long before they understood why. And protection, once learned, does not disappear easily. It becomes a language the body speaks fluently, a reflex that activates before thought, a familiar shield that does not ask permission. The tragedy is not that the brain learned to hide. The tragedy is how deeply it believes hiding is the only way to survive. There is a strange loneliness inside people who never feel safe being themselves. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of being unseen, even while surrounded by others. It is an emptiness that comes from hiding too well, for too long. Inside them lives a quiet war. One part of them longs to be known, deeply, fully, without caution. A part that dreams of speaking freely, laughing loudly, loving openly. A part that aches for someone who understands their hidden worlds, their quiet sensitivities, their unspoken fears. This part is tired of carrying so much in silence, tired of being the calm surface over a restless sea. But there is another part too, the older part, shaped by early wounds and quiet dangers. This part whispers warnings. Don't say too much. Don't show too much. Don't need too much. Don't be too honest. It remembers every moment authenticity was punished, every time vulnerability was mishandled, every instance when showing their true self led to discomfort, chaos, or rejection. So the longing moves forward and the fear pulls back, a constant emotional tug of war. In relationships, this conflict becomes especially painful. They crave closeness, yet fear the exposure that closeness requires. They want to be held, yet feel unsafe being emotionally naked. They wish someone would truly see them, yet instinctively hide when someone tries. This contradiction confuses the people who love them. How can someone be so warm and so distant at the same time? How can they care so deeply yet reveal so little? Why do they shut down right when things get intimate? But the answer is simple, even if the pain is not. They are afraid of being hurt in the ways they were before, so they love from a safe distance. They share in small pieces, never the whole story. They laugh in ways that reveal nothing raw. They apologize quickly to prevent anyone from getting irritated. They retreat the moment their emotions grow too visible. Even joy scares them. Happiness feels like a spotlight. Closeness feels like exposure. Affection feels like a risk. Because somewhere inside, a part of them believes, if someone truly knows me, they might leave. If someone sees my flaws, they might change. If someone gets too close, they might hurt me. They want to trust, but trust feels like walking without armor. And yet the longing does not disappear. It grows quietly. It pushes against the walls they built. It asks for air, for connection, for honesty. But the fear resists. Fear argues that safety lies in staying quiet, staying agreeable, staying small. Fear insists that the walls are there for a reason. This tension creates behaviors that even they don't understand. They may withdraw suddenly when things get too intimate. They may avoid deep conversations, not because they don't want them, but because they want them too much. They may become overly accommodating, hoping that if they stay easy to love, no one will leave. They may silence their own needs, so no one has the power to disappoint them. The longing says, let someone in. The fear says, you know what happens when you do. Both sides think they're protecting the same heart, and in that conflict, exhaustion grows. A tiredness that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from always holding back, always monitoring, always negotiating with themselves. Because what they truly want is simple, to be themselves without consequences, to exist without vigilance, to feel safe without performing. But wanting safety does not create safety. And fear, once learned deeply enough, does not step aside easily. So they continue living in that delicate balance, wanting connection, fearing exposure, never fully choosing either side. And inside them, the war goes on. The part that longs to be seen and the part that learned long ago that being seen is dangerous. There comes a moment, quiet, unexpected, and often painful, when a person who has spent their whole life hiding suddenly stops and realizes something is wrong. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in a slow, heavy way that settles into the chest like a truth they can no longer outrun. It often begins with a small experience, a friendship that feels one-sided, a relationship that collapses without explanation, A conversation where they say something true and feel the fear rise so violently it leaves them shaking. Or a moment when someone asks, "Are you okay?" and they cannot find the words because they've kept the real ones locked away for too long. Sometimes it's an argument that exposes how little they've expressed. Sometimes it's a silence that lasts too long. Sometimes it's the realization that no one, not even the people they love, truly knows them. The breaking point is rarely loud. It's more like something inside them finally whispering, "I can't keep pretending." For years, the act of hiding felt protective. It kept the peace. It prevented conflict. It avoided judgment. It made life smoother on the surface. But now, adulthood reveals the cost. They don't recognize themselves anymore. They don't know what they truly like, dislike, want, or need. They've spent so long adjusting to others that their own identity feels blurry, fragmented, uncertain. It hits them in an ordinary moment, maybe while brushing their teeth, driving home, or staring at their phone in the dark. A sudden awareness that they have built a life that doesn't feel like theirs. They realize they are surrounded by people who love the mask, but have never met the person beneath it. This realization hurts in a unique way. It's not anger, not regret, not sadness. It is grief. Grief for the childhood self who dimmed their light to feel safe. Grief for the teenager who stayed quiet when they wanted to scream. Grief for the adult who has spent years apologizing for existing too fully. For some, the breaking point comes in the form of loneliness. Not being alone, but being emotionally unheld. Being the strong one, the calm one, the steady one, until it becomes unbearable. For others, it comes in the form of love. Someone tries to get close, gentle, patient, genuine, and instead of comfort, it triggers panic. Not because the love is wrong, but because their nervous system has no template for being seen safely. Still others feel it during moments of joy. A celebration, a compliment, a breakthrough at work. Something inside them recoils, not because they don't deserve it, but because joy feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things feel unsafe. Eventually, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Hiding has not saved them. It has only starved them. And there comes a moment, a turning point, when something shifts. A small but unmistakable sense of rebellion rises. A quiet voice inside, stronger than fear, says, "I want more than survival. I want to be real. I want a life that feels like mine." This is the beginning of change, not the glamorous kind, not the cinematic kind, but the deeply human kind. The kind that starts with exhaustion, honesty, and a trembling desire to finally breathe. From the outside, it seems simple, but inside, it is a revolution. Because for someone who has never felt safe being themselves, the bravest moment is not a confession or a confrontation or a dramatic transformation. The bravest moment is the quiet realization, felt alone and without witnesses. I can't keep living hidden. I want to be seen. Something has to change. And that realization, soft, fragile, and frightening, is the first time in their life that the desire to be whole outweighs the fear of being hurt. Healing, for people who have never felt safe being themselves, does not arrive suddenly. There is no dramatic sunrise, no cinematic moment of transformation. Instead, it begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a small shift in the air that only they can feel. A soft awareness that something inside them is loosening. A sense that maybe, just maybe, they no longer want to carry the weight of who they were forced to become. More than anything, healing starts with permission, not permission to be bold or loud or expressive, but permission to exist without constant self-editing, to let a real thought slip out without rehearsing it, to feel an emotion without shrinking, to sit in a conversation without monitoring every reaction. In the beginning, it feels wrong, unfamiliar, unsafe. The nervous system reacts like it's stepping into a bright room after years in the dark. It flinches, it overcorrects, it panics. Even harmless moments feel like risks. Saying no, expressing a preference, asking a question, disagreeing gently. The body interprets them as exposure, and the old fear rises like a conditioned reflex. But something new arises alongside that fear. A small, steady voice that says, "It's okay. Nothing bad is happening. You can be here. You are allowed." This voice is not confidence. It is not self-love. It is simply permission, which is often where all healing begins. Gradually, they start noticing themselves in ways they never have before. A moment of laughter that feels unfiltered. A truth spoken without trembling. A boundary held without guilt. A tear that falls without apology. These moments are tiny, but they accumulate. They begin forming a new internal map, one where authenticity doesn't automatically equal danger. And healing does not only happen alone, it often happens gently, through people who feel safe. The friend who listens without judgment, the partner who doesn't punish vulnerability, the stranger who offers kindness with no expectations. People who respond softly to their softness and do not turn their truths into weapons. These relationships act like small, corrective experiences. They teach the nervous system something it has never believed, that safety is possible, that being seen does not always lead to harm, that connection can feel steady instead of sharp. But healing is not linear. There are setbacks, moments when the old fear surges and they retreat back into familiar patterns, silence, avoidance, pleasing, disappearing. And in those moments, shame comes easily. They feel like they've failed, like they've gone backwards. But what they don't realize is this: every retreat is still progress, because the very awareness that they've retreated is proof that they've grown. You cannot recognize self-betrayal unless you've started discovering self-honesty. With time, they begin distinguishing between fear and instinct, between anxiety and authenticity, between old danger and present safety. A quiet inner stability forms, not loud or dramatic, but grounded. They begin trusting their emotions instead of censoring them. They begin recognizing their worth without external validation. They begin choosing people who nourish them rather than drain them. Most importantly, they begin meeting themselves, the self underneath the self-protection, the child who was once told to stay small, the teenager who swallowed every truth, the adult who spent years apologizing for existing too fully. And for the first time, they do not push that self away. They sit with it. They listen to it. They let it speak. Healing then becomes an internal reunion, a slow, gentle reclaiming of all the parts they hid for survival. It is not about becoming fearless. It is about becoming honest. It is about learning that visibility is not the enemy, and that who they are, quiet or expressive, soft or strong, messy or composed, is not a problem that needs fixing. It is a self that deserves to exist without caution, without guilt, without shrinking. And that realization, tender and fragile at first, becomes the foundation on which their new life is built. A life where authenticity is no longer a risk, but a quiet home they are slowly learning to return to. There comes a day, quiet and unannounced, when a person who has spent their whole life hiding realizes they are no longer holding their breath. It happens during an ordinary moment, the kind that arrives with no drama and no witness. Maybe while pouring tea, or tying their shoes, or standing in warm sunlight by a window. A moment so small that it could easily pass unnoticed, were it not for the unfamiliar feeling that settles inside the chest, a sense of ease. It is not perfection. It is not certainty. It is simply the absence of fear, even if only for a minute. For someone who has lived with hypervigilance woven into their bones, even 1 minute of ease is miraculous. It feels like discovering a room inside themselves they never knew existed, one filled with soft air, open space, and light that doesn't demand anything from them. And slowly, they begin choosing that room more often. Authenticity begins returning in quiet waves. not as a performance, not as a declaration, but as a subtle shift in how they move through the world. They speak a little more freely. They laugh without checking who is watching. They say, "I don't like that," without trembling. They allow their sadness to be seen by someone who has earned the right to see it. They allow their joy to exist without shrinking it to make others comfortable. None of these moments look extraordinary from the outside, but internally, they are tectonic, because for the first time, their life begins forming around who they are, not who they learned to be. And in this new life, something beautiful happens. They start recognizing themselves. They notice preferences they had buried. They rediscover dreams they had abandoned. They reconnect with curiosities they once silenced. They feel impulses, emotions, truths rising to the surface, not dangerously, but naturally. The world, which once felt full of danger, begins to feel navigable, not because the world has changed, but because the person walking through it is finally meeting it with their true face. Relationships shift too. Some become deeper, more meaningful, more reciprocal. Others fade, not from conflict, but because the old role, the quiet one, the agreeable one, the invisible one, no longer fits. And as painful as these changes can be, they also create room for connection that feels real instead of rehearsed. There is still fear. Healing does not erase it, but the fear is no longer the one in control. It no longer dictates every choice, every word, every emotion. It becomes a voice they can hear without obeying, a memory they can acknowledge without recreating. And in place of fear, something else begins to grow, something gentle, steady, and warm, a sense of belonging to themselves. For the first time, they do not look at their own reflection and see someone unfinished or fractured. They see someone who survived, someone who adapted, someone who learned to navigate a world without guidance and is now learning, slowly, to live instead of just endure. Their story does not end with triumph. It ends with truth, a truth that feels like a return, not to who they used to be, but to who they were always meant to become before fear taught them otherwise. And when they look back at the younger version of themselves, the child who stayed quiet, the teenager who hid their feelings, the adult who apologized for existing, there is no anger, only compassion. Because they see now that none of those versions were weak. They were doing the only thing they knew how to do, protect themselves in a world that didn't know how to hold them. A life lived in the open doesn't mean living loudly. It means living honestly, quietly, softly, consistently. A steady life, a real life. And if there is one final truth this journey reveals, it is this. When a person who has spent their entire life hiding finally feels safe being themselves, the world does not suddenly become easier, but it becomes theirs. Not borrowed, not filtered, not performed. Theirs. Fully, quietly, beautifully theirs.